Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going on a bit of a wild ride, shrinking ourselves down to a microscopic level to get a look at the fundamental building blocks of, well, everything that's alive. We're talking about the cell.
All right, let's just jump right in. I want you to think about something for a second. You, the plant in your office, your dog, every single living thing is made up of these trillions of tiny, bustling units. And they're not just, boring bricks stacked on top of each other. No way. They're more like individual living rooms, each one with its own specific job to do. We're talking, of course, about cells.
So how do we even begin to navigate this incredibly tiny world? Well, scientists have this really clever tool. It's kind of like a master blueprint called the typical cell. Now, this isn't a photo of any one specific cell. Instead, it's a simplified model, like a standard map. It shows us all the most important parts, these little cell organs called organelles that we're almost always going to find. It gives us a great starting point to compare all the different cells out there. Okay, so this basic blueprint, it really comes in two main flavors. And even though they share a ton of the same features, the cells that make up a plant versus the cells that make up an animal, well, they have some really critical game-changing differences. And what's so cool is you can see a huge difference right away just by looking at their shapes. Plant cells, think of an onion cell, they're usually kind of rectangular and rigid. But animal cells, like the ones from inside your own cheek, are much more flexible and can have all sorts of irregular shapes. And it all boils down to one single key piece of their structure.
So, with that in mind, thinking about those different shapes and structures, can you guess what it is? What's the one major part that you'll only find in a plant cell? The thing that gives it that distinct, sturdy shape?
Yes! If you were thinking cell wall, you nailed it. The cell wall is this super tough, sturdy layer. It's mostly made of something called cellulose, which is basically the same stuff that makes wood and plant stems so strong. It's built outside the cell membrane, and it really acts like a suit of armor. It's what gives plants their structure, their strength, and that fixed shape we were just talking about. Okay, so let's dig into these outer layers. We're going to start from the outside and work our way in, looking at the gatekeeper that every cell has, and then the fortress that only some of them get. All right, so it doesn't matter if it's a plant or an animal cell, they both have this first layer of control called the cell membrane. You might also hear it called the plasma membrane. Now, for an animal cell, this membrane is the outer boundary, but for a plant cell, it's actually tucked just inside that tough cell wall. The most important thing to get here is what this membrane actually does. It's not just some simple plastic bag holding everything in. No, it's this incredibly smart gatekeeper. The scientific term is selectively permeable, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's super picky about what it lets in and what it lets out. And that's absolutely crucial for keeping that delicate chemical balance that life depends on. And you can actually watch this whole process happen. The source material lays out this really simple but totally brilliant experiment using a real leaf. So first, you put a piece of the leaf in regular water and look at the healthy cells under a microscope. But then, you add a couple of drops of a really strong salt solution, and you just wait a few minutes. And what happens next is amazing, because the solution outside the cell is now way saltier than the inside. That selectively permeable membrane kicks into action. It lets water rush out of the cell to try and even things out. The result? Just like the quote says, the cytoplasm, that's all the jelly-like stuff inside the cell, it actually shrinks and pulls away from the cell's outer wall. You can literally see it happen. And that outer wall that everything is pulling away from, that's the cell wall we were talking about, that rigid fortress that only plant cells have. It's super tough, but it's also porous, and it provides all that critical support. In fact, this is what lets a plant cell handle big changes in water pressure. An animal cell in the same situation, it would just pop. So yeah, this one single feature, having a cell wall or not having one, is hands down the number one biggest difference between a plant cell and an animal cell, period. Okay, we've explored the outer defenses. Now, let's breach the walls and head straight for the command center. We're going to the very heart of the cell, to what is arguably the most important organelle of them all. Right in the middle of all the action, you'll find the cell's brain. It's the central processing unit, the main office, whatever you want to call it. This is the part that holds all the blueprints and gives all the orders for everything the cell does, from growing to fixing itself to making new cells. And that structure is called the nucleus. You can really think of it as the CEO of the cell. It's where all the genetic blueprints, the DNA, are stored. It uses that info to manage every single operation, from day-to-day repairs to massive projects like cell division. It's making all the big decisions to keep the whole operation running smoothly.
All right, that was a pretty quick tour. So let's take a step back and do a quick recap of the key players we just met and really nail down the big differences between our two main types of cells.
This table lays it out perfectly. You've got the animal cell on one side. Its outer layer is that flexible cell membrane, which lets it be mobile and have a weird shape. Then on the other side, the plant cell. Its outer layer is that tough cell wall, giving it a fixed, boxy shape and way more protection. It's pretty clear that these simple structural differences completely change how these cells live and work.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that these tiny, tiny little architectural differences at the microscopic level have huge, massive consequences in the world we see. I mean, the simple fact of whether a cell has a wall or not, that's the difference between a solid tree branch and a flexible muscle. It's the foundation for all the amazing diversity of life on Earth. And that brings us to one last really interesting question to chew on. We've established that the cell wall is like a tough, protective fortress, right? So if plants are built out of millions of these tiny, walled-off boxes, how in the world do they talk to each other? How do they coordinate to work together as one big organism? That's a good puzzle for another time. Thanks for tuning into The Explainer.